Hello, everyone. I'm Christy Anderson. I teach at the University of Toronto, and I am editor-in-chief of the Art Bulletin. And we'd love to welcome you all for the first of our summer publishing workshops. This one, the first of these, is entitled In Print, From the Archive to the Essay. And it's really intended for helping you to think about ways to take a lot of research. Often this is from a dissertation or another big research project, and to shape that into a really strong essay. And of course, organizing this through CAA and as editor of the Art Bulletin, I'm thinking about the Art Bulletin, but that is the place you might submit. But really, our comments and the panelist comments and our discussion today should be, we hope, of help for you no matter where you're submitting an article. As I said, this is one of two sessions that we're organizing this summer. The next one will be next week on Wednesday, August 7th at the same time from 2 to 4 p.m. And that one is going to look at the peer review process from the author's point of view, including how to respond to readers' reports in revising an essay for resubmission. Before we begin, I do want to thank in advance our panelists, who I will get to and introduce in a moment, but especially I'd like to thank the staff of CAA, including Megan Donahue, Debbie Peters, and Eugenia Bell, for all of their help in organizing and promoting these events. So I want to say just a few words with my editor's hat on before we begin the discussion. So in organizing this session and in thinking about what topics we wanted to present, one of my goals in doing this and starting this, we hope will be an ongoing thing that CAA does every year. One of the goals was really to demystify elements of the writing and submission process. For many authors, the process of submitting that, let's say, that first big article comes at a very precarious time in your career. You may have recently finished a dissertation. Perhaps you're starting a job or starting the job search. Maybe you're applying for postdocs, and you have a vast amount of research at hand in that dissertation or even in other files things that didn't even make it into the dissertation. But the steps from that dissertation to an article, and certainly beyond to a book manuscript, can seem even, I think it certainly was for me, even more opaque and impossible than finishing the dissertation. And, to sort of add insult to injury, you're no longer, once you've finished, of course, you're certainly, I hope, in touch with your committee, but you're no longer under that immediate care of an advisor or your dissertation committee. The final thing to sort of add in about that, and what I see as sort of the challenges for authors, especially authors at the early stages of their career, is that when you see an article in the Art Bulletin or any other journal, what you're seeing is a finished product. You're not seeing the mess that it may have been in its early stages. You're not seeing the multiple drafts that an essay goes through. And I think when I send things back to authors as a revise and resubmit with comments, people often feel like, oh, that's kind of like it's sort of cutting a bit. But I just want to assure you that certainly in my time as being editor, no one gets an article in the Art Bulletin without revision. So the process is long. It can take months, sometimes even longer. And you can't kind of judge your process by looking just at the finished sort of Art Bulletin. Art Bulletin as it comes into your mailbox or as you see it on the screen, because what you're missing are the multiple rounds of revision. So today what we're going to do is we have three panelists. We're going to give short comments about when either their own experience in crafting an essay or in helping others to do that. And then they'll have brief comments, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then we will have lots of time for questions. And at any time while we're having the presentations, please feel free to add in questions or things you want to discuss or into the chat, and we will get to those as we go on. So let me please introduce our speakers, our panelists today. The first panelist is Halle O'Neill, who is a reader in Japanese art at the History of Art Department at the University of Edinburgh, and also co-director of the Buddhist Studies. She is currently chair of the Art Bulletin editorial board, and she's published several books, published or written or edited. The first was Word Embodied, the Jeweled Pagoda Mandalas in Japanese Buddhist Art, which came out in 2018, and a recent edited volume, Reuse and Recycling in Japanese Visual and Material Cultures, which came out in 2023. Her current monograph project is tentatively entitled Dead Letters, Reuse, Recycling, and Mourning in Japanese Buddhist Manuscripts. Our second speaker will be Rachel Patt, who is just starting at the University of Notre Dame as assistant professor of art history. Rachel received her PhD from Emory in 2022 with a focus on the material and visual culture of ancient Rome. Her research is broadly on forms of artistic production outside of painting, sculpture, and architecture in the Roman Empire and late antiquity. And she's especially interested in issues of representation, materiality, and scale. She's presently at work on a monograph on intimate forms of Roman portraiture. Rachel also just had, and I think it was the last issue, had an article come out in the Art Bulletin. So Rachel is here to give sort of the insider view of what that experience was like. And our third speaker, whom I will introduce, although we are having, he is having a problem in connecting because Nachiket Chanchani, who is associate professor at the University of Michigan, is currently in a small village at the foothills of the Himalayas, where they have been having torrential and deadly rains. So Nachiket is trying to get onto to join us, and he may be able to do so a little bit later. Nachiket studies South Asian, Himalayan, and Southeast Asian art, architecture, and visual culture. He is the author of 3 books, Mountain Temples and Temple Mountains, Architecture, Religion, and Nature in the Central Himalayas, Amarushatka and the Lives of Sanskrit Love Poems, and India's Composite Heritage. He has published widely, both for academic and for a public audience. And currently he's working on a monograph on vessels as sites of mediation between humans and their environments. And Nachiket is also a member of the editorial board of the Art Bulletin. So I think the first thing that we'll do is I'll ask Halle if she can say a few words, and then we'll go to Rachel. Hopefully Nachiket can join us. If not, I have a few things that I can add in. So Halle, if you would like to start.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad to be part of this conversation. I'm just like Christy, I'm all in favor of demystifying academia, publishing, teaching, the job market, any number of other subjects. We firmly believe that we should be talking about these complicated issues that we all face, but which are not too often openly discussed. It really depends what you know about these topics. It really depends on the program you're in, your supervisor, your cohort. And really, this is what we hope is the first step to opening up a dialogue and really sharing together. So for instance, how do you go about publishing your first article? For my part, I'm going to speak about publishing what I kind of call your leading article out of your big project, something like a dissertation. And then how do you judge how much to include and what to publish, what content from it to publish, especially if you're thinking about converting it into a monograph. So there's benefit to getting your topic out there beyond the eyes of your dissertation committee, even if that might seem like a mildly scary prospect. Not only do you get feedback from other scholars during the peer review process, and you also are able to let the field know about this exciting new research that's happening. It will help you connect with a community of scholars who care about similar issues and subjects. So that's all the benefits. Of course, it's very daunting as well. And I think the anxiety around publishing over time might dim, but it never goes away. And I think that's an important subject to acknowledge as well. But a big project like a doctoral dissertation in art history will have roughly 2 to 3 large interconnecting arguments made across the entirety of the project. Speaking very generally, yours might look something different, and that's totally fine. In general, each chapter will contribute to that overall argument and narrative while also making individual contributions. So that means, though, that at the end, there's a lot of potential material for publication. So how do you decide which of these ideas to publish in your article? Let's use Art Bulletin as an example journal. A typical AB article will be around 15,000 to 16,000 words, which is one of the longer ones. And that gives you space, though, to really develop an article out of this bigger project that offers an in-depth idea that's cohesive and grounded and innovative. You can think of this, and I do, whenever you're publishing out from a new project, be it the dissertation or your second book or whatever it is, any big research project, I think of that first kind of article as your big ideas article. It's like introducing the subject to the field. Of course, there are other types of articles you can pull from your doctoral material that wouldn't necessarily have the same reach or require the same sophisticated depth as your big ideas article. And that's certainly another way to go. For instance, that might be good as a second article coming out of your PhD. And we can talk about the differences there, maybe in Q&A if you have questions. There will be some amount of introducing the topic, the context, the existing scholarship to the reader. The length of all of that will depend on whether your subject is more widely known and how much introduction you need to give a general reader. But after that, you still, at least with the Art Bulletin article, you still have ample space left to explore a key idea from your dissertation. I know that Rachel and Nachiket, if he's able to join us, will offer more detailed thoughts about this. So I'm going to skip ahead to possible questions that you might have around what material to select and how that might impact a press's consideration of your dissertation as a monograph, if you choose to go that route. So one option is to pick a case study from your project that can be transformed into a tidy, self-contained article, one where you explore a specific example or phenomenon that partakes of the overall argument, while at the same time giving the article borders because of its specificity. That's probably the more straightforward option. When I first published my first article out of the PhD, it was with the Art Bulletin, and I really didn't have an individual case study necessarily to go to. So for those of you with a similar dilemma, I would suggest weighing up which of your arguments in the project you can cohesively explain in a single article. And some of you might have been cautioned that you don't want to give away the project's big idea because you want to keep presses interested in your monograph. I would say that, and this is just my opinion, I would say that you don't necessarily have to overly worry about that, because your research, this big research project, its big original idea, that can't be made in a single article anyway. It's developed over the course of your much larger project. But what you can give is a taster of it to generate interest around your subject. I would suggest then picking the idea that excites you most about your work and the one that you think will also have the greatest relevance to readers outside your own subject area. You might have to tease apart your dissertation's larger claims to find that discrete idea that you believe will resonate with others and reflect the originality of your overall project. essentially, I think you just want to show your research in the best light. So I wouldn't overly worry about giving away your main crux or the main idea, because articles allow you to present a focused, thoroughly researched study that distills a part of your main argument. And this probably goes without saying, but it's not really the best to cut and paste from a dissertation to make that article. It will need reshaping and reframing, because a dissertation is quite a different thing from a big ideas article or a monograph. Your published work should take a broader view that speaks to readers beyond your subject. It needs a clearly articulated answer to that dreaded question, so what? Like, why does this matter? What's the significance of this, nuanced, in-depth, thoroughly researched big project? Why? Why should anyone care? So that's always really daunting to come up against, and something that every single, researcher has to think about. So what I suggest is think about why someone in another field of art history should care about your particular study, right? They know nothing of it, but you want them to care. And you know that there's either questions or methodology or material within that will resonate with them, and then write for that person. This will generate interest in seeing more of your work, right? And having an article in a good disciplinary journal like Art Bulletin can be helpful when you approach a press. So about presses, they're all different, obviously. So taking advice from multiple people that you trust is a good strategy. But by and large, it's usually okay to publish one, definitely one's fine, maybe even 2 articles from your doctoral work. It's also about where the articles have been published. And if you put too much material out in field-specific journals, the readership of which significantly overlaps with the target audience of your book, then that can be a concern for the press. And I think that's where this idea of don't overpublish, that's where really you want to make sure that you're speaking to different audiences. And actually, if you are planning on converting your dissertation into a book, it's good to put your work into a field-specific journal, but also a disciplinary journal, or perhaps if it's interdisciplinary work over there, because you're actually building up readership of people who will want to read your book. But I guess to conclude, my overall advice is to write the article that shows why you cared about this topic in the first place. Your enthusiasm for that subject will make people want to know more. So take a step back from the project and think about which overarching idea branches out into broader conversations. And of course, you can't present it in its entirety, but you can frame it in a way that addresses 1 or 2 specific questions within the article. And you can continue to publish your work elsewhere in long-form articles, shorter essays, and then that monograph if you want.
Thank you, Halle. Thank you. Rachel, can I ask you to say a few words about how it was for you publishing in the Art Bulletin, some of the challenges, any advice that you have for people taking this on?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I just wanted to thank Christy and the whole CAA staff for inviting me to participate in this webinar. It's great to be here. And as Christy mentioned in the introduction, I did just go through this process. My article was out in the March issue of this year's Art Bulletin, so this is all quite fresh for me as an emerging scholar who recently finished her PhD. And so what I wanted to do in my remarks today is share with you my experience, my approaches of how to draw out articles from the dissertation, bearing in mind, of course, that this is very personal and that not one size fits all. In fact, I'm hoping to show that there can be a multiplicity of approaches. And also to bear in mind that I am still working through, for instance, I don't have my monograph out. So even some of the things that Halle just remarked upon are very much on my own mind as I'm navigating this process myself. But in terms of the articles, so I finished my dissertation and I hadn't published an article, and I was beginning to think, where might be the appropriate venue to make a splash, to introduce myself to the scholarly community as an emerging art historian. And I, for a variety of reasons, decided that it was important to me personally to try to speak to art historians broadly, and to think about what sort of trans-historical stakes were present in my dissertation, even though I'm a Roman art historian. And so that's why the Art Bulletin was suggested to me by some colleagues as an appropriate venue to be able to reach that broader audience. And so for me, I mean, just to use Halle's very nice terminology, my article was, in her phrase, my big ideas article from my dissertation. And so I was really thinking, what was the big idea, or what were the maybe couple of big ideas that would appeal to readers who are not specialists in ancient Mediterranean art? Because I work on Roman portraiture, I was, sort of engaging for the Art Bulletin essay, the ideas about representation, the history of emotions, and also sort of the spectrum of visualities that I engaged throughout my dissertation. I thought that those were sort of the more salient points that I could draw out from the dissertation research and thread together in an essay for a broader readership. But for me, what that ended up looking like was taking this large dissertation project, which was 8 chapters, and actually weaving through bits and pieces from 5 of the chapters. So it was less of to Halle's point, you can't simply cut and paste, in my case, one of the dissertation chapters. It was really honing in on, okay, if I'm trying to speak to a broader audience of art historians, what are the themes that are really going to resonate, and picking out the most pertinent bits from each of these various chapters. Another thing I would say in terms of the development of this essay was that it was really critical for me to speak to various colleagues. To Christy's point, that we are not in a position anymore where we can rely on our dissertation committee members. I found myself reaching out to new mentors and to peers who had already published in the Art Bulletin, and really asking them to read multiple drafts to sort of make sure that I was hitting the right tone and the right level of interest for people who were, say, working in Byzantium or working in Renaissance Italy, that these issues that I was really trying to hone in on were going to be appealing. And so this was kind of how I shaped this big ideas article. But I had another article come out from the dissertation that took a very different journey and had very different origins. And so I briefly wanted to share that with you all as well, just so that you get a sense that there are multiple ways of doing this. And for me, that second article was something that I had relegated to a footnote in my dissertation. It was an interesting problem about one of the inscriptions on the portraits I work on. There wasn't really time to develop it in the dissertation as it should have been, but it bugged me and it needed to be addressed, and I wanted to think through it and sort of chew on that material. But because this was a very specific, thorny problem for my own field, and even sort of a field within a field, because it goes into Latin epigraphy, which I don't think the broad readership of the Art Bulletin is that interested in, right? I thought through and decided that the more appropriate venue for that article would be a different, more field-specific journal. And so that really was an opportunity for me to delve into something of great interest to me that stemmed from my dissertation work, but that had a completely different evolution because there really hadn't been a space to address it in the dissertation. And so those are my 2 examples. Again, this is highly personal, but I hope even in that small sample size, you can get a sense that there isn't one right way, although I quite liked Halle's way of breaking down the big ideas or the case study, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Rachel. Um, I have a couple questions, but I wanted to add in a few other thoughts, which both Halle and Rachel brought up, which is this issue of field specific versus non-field specific, and what does that actually mean? Because one of the things that makes the Art Bulletin unique is that it really aims to be a journal with a readership across the field of art history. I mean, an architectural history, and one could even archaeology, material culture. I mean, that it's meant to have a kind of breadth. So when I'm looking for essays for the Art Bulletin, I am really looking for this idea that why does someone not in your field want to read this essay? And it's something that I ask everybody when they're revising to resubmit. If it's ancient, why would a modernist want to read it? If it's on East Asia, why would somebody who works maybe in the global South want to read it? Whatever that is. And why that's so important and why it's so sort of central to the brief of the Art Bulletin is that I'm really looking for essays which, while rooted in original and new research and carefully done and written and all of that, but that move the discipline forward in some way, like move it into new ground. Um, and so, when people say, oh, what kinds of things are you publishing now? What are you looking for? I mean, I'm not looking for any specific field. I mean, I'm not, I will publish things on Italian the most canonical Italian Renaissance, if I think they're looking at it in a new way that's moving the field forward, not simply finding new information. Not that that's wrong, but that's not the sort of brief per se of the Art Bulletin. And I think one way to think about that is in terms of your readers. Who do you want to know about what you're doing? Who do you think, should be in your camp following your work? And, while you're doing the dissertation, what you're hoping is that your committee loves your work and passes you and there's no corrections to the dissertation or something like that. But that's not what the Art Bulletin is looking for. I mean, I'm looking for why an educated, interested person in the visual arts would want to read it. And one way that I often suggest to people for figuring out, what is that and what might that mean for me, is to point them perhaps to a few articles. And there are two essays that and again, there are so many, but there are two that I've published while I've been editor that I think are incredibly good at doing this. One is an essay by the classicist Maggie Popkin, who wrote an essay on gladiator knife handles, which came out in June of 2023, where after she spoke about and talked about these gladiator knife handles, she then sort of had a call for that we should all be working, or people should be working on sports paraphernalia, that we don't pay enough attention to the kind of objects, the jerseys, the bobbleheads, whatever they are, that come out from sports teams. And I thought that, she sort of really made a call for that in her last section. The other essay that did this, I think, incredibly well was one that came out the issue after by Jessica Barker on maintenance work and the long life of materials in medieval art. And that came out in September of 23. And what Jessica did was to talk about why we need to think about the maintenance of works of art, not the restoration or the preservation, but how works were kind of maintained on a daily or on a regular basis. She was looking at late medieval, but she raised the question, kind of in a theoretical way, right from the beginning. And those two essays, I would suggest if you're trying to figure out how to do this, I thought were incredibly effective. And the sort of final thing before we get to some questions that all of us can think about is I think it's really important when you're thinking about writing an essay for the Art Bulletin or wherever, is to pick an essay from the journal that you really like whatever that is, doesn't even have to be in your field, and read it not for the content, but read it for the structure. Like, how did they do that? How did they organize it? Where did they put in their topic sentence or their big question or their big idea? How did they cover the previous research? Did they just do it in the footnotes? Did they do it in the text? So I think it's helpful to sometimes read these essays as you're trying to write one, to kind of find a model for you to follow. Like, oh, that, they're doing what I want to do for my essay. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. There are wonderful essays in the Art Bulletin and elsewhere that can serve as models for you in thinking about how to write your essay. So first of all, we'll repeat again, we're happy to answer questions. This is really meant to be a kind of discussion, whether they're specific or general. We will do our best to try to answer them. So please feel free to put those into the chat. I wanted to ask Rachel especially, but also Halle, we're talking a lot about how to reshape dissertations or lots of research. What did you find, or have you found, that you left out from the dissertation? Like, in other words, what did you not, as you were going through your dissertation or your research, and let's for the moment talk about an Art Bulletin article, what did you not include? What did you say, like, oh, no, that's good for the dissertation, but I'm not going to try to get that into the article? So I don't know, Rachel, did you?
Yeah, this is really interesting because I made judgment calls in my process while I was writing the version that I submitted. And then in the reader reports, sometimes I was surprised by, oh my gosh, where is this? Where is this information? And I said, oh, this is in the dissertation. And I had made the judgment call that it didn't need to be in the article. And I was, of course, it went in the final version. So this is all to say that I made some decisions, and then turns out that that information I decided was worth cutting was actually wanted. And this information ended up being about context. So to zoom out a little bit, my dissertation focused on a very small corpus of 18 Roman portraits, about so big, palm-sized, that you can fit into your hand, made out of gold and glass. And I said to myself when I was writing the original draft that became the version 1 that I submitted to the Art Bulletin for consideration, I left out most of the catalog bit. This I thought was very dissertation specific, especially in my field in ancient Mediterranean art. It is not uncommon to have a sort of catalog portion of your dissertation. And I also left out a fair bit about the context and the afterlives of these objects after their original use, because I didn't think it was pertinent to the big idea that I was sharing. Got the reader reports, turned out that some of that was wanted. So I think, you take a stab at it, certainly. And, convention holds that certain things are more genre appropriate for the dissertation in terms of the literature review, the catalog, etc. But in the end, certainly as someone who's still figuring this out herself, it's helpful then to get that editorial feedback and realize actually the broader audience would like, for instance, to know about the afterlives of these objects.
Thank you. Halle, do you have any, about leaving out things that
Yes. So I think, well, very much similar to what Rachel has said, that because I'm working in Japanese Buddhist material of the medieval world, and that first project was very doctrinal heavy and looking, and so I thought, well, I can't introduce much of that actually, but hone in on what was more visual and material. And I was really glad, because I think in my field there was you have to show that you've read this and that, and you're familiar with these sutras and that practice. And so it was nice to be like, well, but I only have 17,000 words, so I'm going to highlight the visual and the materiality. And so I was just able simply to pull out, with these paintings, the performativity, and to talk about calligrams and to say, hey, Japan has calligrams as well. And that was really important to me. But the other thing I left out, and also left out of the book that came out of this, is, you have these sections of your dissertation where you're just trying things out. And I think that's good, because we should be always trying to do something new and inventive, even though that is a bit scary. I think, the scholars that I love reading the most are really always surprising me with the connections they're making. And so I had this section about calligrams from around the world, because I was trying to link in, what does it mean if portraiture is done in like micography or something like that. And you can find it, Hebrew micography and Sufi bodies represented with calligraphy. It was wonderful. But, I decided to leave that there. So I think, maybe later I would pick that up. But for the time being, I think a dissertation is a wonderful place to experiment and carry forth some of that good experimentation into your publications as well.
Great, thank you. I think we have a couple questions in the chat. Eugenia, do you want to?
Yes. Hi, everybody. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one asks, does anyone have any tips for beginning to think broadly outside of a specific discipline? The guest currently works primarily in photography.
Halle, Rachel, do you want to start, or?
Sure. I think that's, well, I just have one thing to say really, which is, I think that is some of the best stuff that we can do during our research time. It's not procrastination to read outside of your field and to read, even literature that gives you ideas, or, pop novels, whatever. I think that reading widely is good time. It's good thinking time. And if I come across, and I ask my colleagues, I think, you have whatever cohort you have, your colleagues or fellow students, ask them, what's your favorite article? What inspires you? Which is a really good model. I love that Christy said, choose an essay as a model and then try to pick it apart. How did they write this so well? We should all be doing that outside of our field. And I think when you're doing that, you come across, surprisingly, you'll come across, a theory applied in a way that you never thought about, or a question raised about similar material, and then that impacts you. And I think I would suggest talk to your colleagues, whoever that is, your cohort, and don't feel like not covering every bit that's ever been written about your own specific topic. That if you're not doing that, and you're reading outside, that's somehow procrastinating, because really those ideas are going to percolate and they will make an impact. So that would be my suggestion.
Rachel, do you want to say a little bit about the big context of your article? I mean, and how did you find that?
I'm, in terms of the big context, if you have something specific in mind, I'm not sure what that is.
Because you had the whole idea about pathos and, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
kind of interdisciplinary.
This leads well into what I was going to say, following Halle's remarks, which One, I completely concur to lean on your various cohorts, whatever those might look like, whether that is a fellowship cohort or a summer program you've done or your grad student cohort. That is how we even started a reading group, one of these cohorts, in which we each decided to choose an article that was a very important for us personally article to share with our other peers. This was at CASVA. So I definitely, I second that idea. But for me, the other way I really started reading and thinking outside of the ancient Mediterranean was to pick the bigger strands in my research and the methodological strands and look outside of them. So, for instance, I've mentioned that I'm a portrait person, and I began to read. This is a natural point of entry, right? To begin thinking about the tradition of portraiture in other places and in other times. Christy mentioned in the introduction that I'm very interested in scale. And so I began to look at people who were working on portrait miniatures, say from Elizabethan England, from, the small early modern eye miniatures that are just of your eyeball. Really interesting stuff. This is one way you can get outside of your own chronology and geography, but see where else these bigger themes take you. And I did that for methodologies as well, thinking about I'm very interested in the aesthetics of wonder and the agency of materials. And so I began to read about enchantment more broadly and the wondrous more broadly. And what Christy mentioned at the beginning is that my big idea, so to speak, is really rooted in the history of emotions. I'm really thinking about these small scale Roman portraits through the lens of longing, a particular kind of love for an absent beloved who was depicted in one of these portraits. And so that is another way to, again, begin looking outside of your discipline, is to see who else is, in that Venn diagram intersection between visual culture and the history of emotions.
Those are great. I mean, I'll add in a few of my ways that I do it. Two ways which may seem rather silly, but really work for me. One is I make a list of keywords. I look at any piece of writing and I go through and I pick what seem to be the words that just kind of have energy, like whatever it is. I mean, so those kind of give me almost, I mean, I don't want to say things to do literature search on, because again, just like Rachel said, like I love to find the person in literature who wrote something about Shakespeare that talked about the same issue that I'm looking at in some 15th century building. I mean, that's speaking about my own research. The other thing, and again, this says something about my consumerism, is which section of the bookstores I tend to go to. If I go to a really good bookstore, am I wandering around anthropology? Am I wandering around literary theory? Sort of what am I feeling drawn to at that moment? And, I think all of us, one of the things that's coming out is that, it is very much about you. It's very much about, why does this topic excite you? How can you share that excitement to somebody else, that they don't need to know everything about Renaissance architecture, whatever the thing is, but they would kind of relate to it from a kind of thematic point of view. And that, for me, that's one of the most fun parts about doing research, is finding where other people are working on similar things. And so to kind of tap into their ideas, and, often these are outside of art history or material culture. They're kind of in some other domain. So I think all those ways, sometimes I think about it as, it's not that I actually have a person like this, but if I had a very smart aunt and I was trying to tell my very smart aunt, somebody who is interested in art, about what it is that I'm working on, I wouldn't want to go into all the nudgy details, but I would want to tell her about why this is so exciting and why I'm spending all this time doing this. So, sometimes that non-academic friend, parent or a friend who's outside the field, if you can kind of explain it to them, you can start to see what's really at the core of that thing that you're working at. And that's what I want you to tell me. I want you to tell me like what's at the core of it. And that's also, if you have a good editor at your journal or at your press, they can help you with that too, but time is often limited. So it might be something that you need to kind of think through. So I hope that helped answer some of those questions. Anything else? Eugenia, I think we have another.
We do. Someone asks that, given the pressures on everybody's time these days, how do I best ask mentors, advisors, and/or peers to read my essay?
So what do you guys think? How do you, and I have to say, this never gets, everybody's so busy. Everybody is super busy. So I don't know, Halle, how do you do this? How do you deal with this?
Yes, I know. And then you look at your colleagues and they're reading their PhD students' work and you're like, but can you also read this chapter I've got? So I think regardless of who your cohort is, we're all very busy. We're all doing lots of, our own work and outside work and having other jobs. But if you can create a support network where you share, and it's a rotating kind of favor that you do, that's how I have found it to be the most useful. The colleagues who I asked to read drafts of my book, I have read theirs, or I will read theirs. It's kind of like a promise of let's support one another. And so if you have peer groups like that and colleagues like that, that's really great because you feel like you're doing them a favor, but they're doing you a favor, but you're also going to be able to return that. Right. When it's say you're a doctoral student, that your supervisor, that's what they want to do. So you shouldn't feel too much pressure submitting work to them or asking for advice. And I think, when I wrote my first article, I sent it to I didn't have any network outside my own committee. So I asked my PhD supervisor to read it for me. I try not to lean on her too much now, and ask other people. But if you're still a student, that's totally fine. And if you feel pressure and like you can't ask, then I think that's a conversation worth having, why you feel like you aren't maybe getting this support. But, or maybe it's just a misunderstanding and you can come together and understand how best to work, and share these ideas.
Rachel, how do you, because you're on the cusp, so how are you dealing with this now?
A couple of different ways. I echo what Halle says about reciprocity and having a support group. For my postdoc years, I had a postdoc small 5-people writing group that we, kind of from various different networks, we all came together. We didn't all know each other at the beginning. And we read each other's drafts for either book proposals. A lot of it was book proposal focused, but some article drafts, some book chapters. And knowing that, people are going to be taking their precious time and looking at my work, I'm also going to be reciprocating and looking at theirs. And then there's a sense of us all growing together and giving back to each other. And that's really good. Not just for your writing, right, but also for fostering your network. The other thing that I would say is that people have been, at least for me, incredibly generous with their time. I'm thinking of a couple people in particular who you will find in my acknowledgments, but there's a really true sense of generosity, especially when you're beginning. People have been willing to invest the time. And again, some of these people have come back to me later for other things to ask me to read something of theirs. And, it's understood that this is how we all support each other. But I guess what I'm trying to say is don't be hesitant to go out on a limb and ask someone, because at least, I've found in my experience that people are actually extremely generous. And that's really wonderful and really a kind thing to do while we're trying to navigate this space of publishing, maybe for the first time.
Yeah. No, I think that's, I mean, I have two groups. I mean, just, I'm in my mid 60s and I have two writing groups that we share everything. And I have a friend to whom I send everything and they send everything to me. So there is this kind of back and forth, which I think is incredibly important. I mean, I'll also, because I think often about the mental health of students and the mental health of young, although we have a lovely life, ideally, it's not a life without pressure. And being an academic is, I found it, I have lots of friends, but I found it, it's a very lonely life. You're often really working by yourself. So, I would say it's about developing readers, but it's also developing your support network and your colleagues and the people to run other stuff by or whatever. So I think figuring out and writing groups, out of COVID, that's one of the great things that's happened, is sort of online writing groups and having groups of friends, and maybe you get together on a Friday afternoon for an hour and write together, something like that. The other thing I just want to throw out there, because I think this is something that certainly from my graduate school time and early career has really changed. And I often recommend this to authors submitting things for the Art Bulletin that need a lot of revision, is developmental editors. There are lots of great developmental editors out there. They're often academics who, for one reason or another, decided not to go into academia. They have PhDs in art history or English or related fields. It's not free. You do have to, this is a cost, which you may, and I understand that's prohibitive for some people, but there's also the possibility of getting a developmental editor who will read, not for the, to say the footnote is right or wrong, but read for the layout of the argument, the layout of the essay. And that can be super helpful. And if it's something that's really important, like getting your book proposal in or getting a big article in, it could be worth the investment if that's possible for you. So there are people out there that are great in helping you read critically. And those are easy enough to find. If you Google, find academic developmental editors. Eugenia, there's a few more.
There are a few more questions. We have two kind of similar questions. Someone asks, what are your thoughts about publishing material outside of your subfield unrelated to the dissertation? And how will this typically be perceived? Somewhat related, there's an adjacent question. What about publishing some of your dissertation in a non-academic setting? Does this negatively impact your chances to publish in an academic journal?
Do you guys want to, I don't know, Halle, do you?
Yeah, I think that first question about how your dissertation committee, your supervisor will respond to publishing not your dissertation material, but something related. If you're still a student, I think I'm always a bit nervous just about the time that it will take you away from your thesis or your dissertation. So I, unless it's a project that becomes like a hobby, something that you do in your free time, that really is, and that you consequently, because you're going to be using your free time, the little bit that you've got, doing another article that isn't related, make sure it's worth it, that it really is a relaxing process for you. So I think that is a question I think has to be asked to your supervisor, or your committee, because maybe you are like flying through and you've got that space, but that's very rare. And so I think from a supervisor point of view, I would be nervous, but I think it's great to be highlighting these ideas. It's kind of like what Rachel said her second article grew out of a footnote, right? This book I'm writing, it grew out of, a tiny line, basically. So this happens all the time. You put that to away for a bit, or work on it in your free time. But it's not that you shouldn't develop it. I think it's just that you've got to have the right space and time and have it be a healthy process for you, and not one that actually causes you to fall behind. But we all have these type of projects where we're like, oh, I could write about that, or I really, really want to research this. So I think check with your supervisor, and then keep it in the back burner.
But Halle, what would you say about for people who are finished their dissertation, and they're starting their new, a job, or they're not, let's say, under direct supervision of an advisor anymore?
Yeah, I think it shows range, I think that as long as your initial focus should be publishing within your research area, because that's what, if you're going for academic jobs or teaching jobs or something like this, then you want to show that you have produced within that research field, and that it's fertile, that you'll keep doing that. But as long as you've got that going in the pipeline and out, then you can show as well that you've got this other range. I don't think it's a problem at all. It's just about time management. And maybe I'm just particularly bad about it, but I can do like one thing at a time, basically.
Rachel, have you?
I would just say, to echo Halle, I agree. This was, again, my process illustrates this, that it was most important for me that my first article really set the stage of who I am as a scholar and stake out that intellectual territory, the big picture. And then once that was in the pipeline, I felt like I could take the time and space to go back to this thorny problem that bothered me, that had a more narrow capacity. It's going to speak to fewer people, but at the end of the day, it also had a sort of so what moment, a bigger takeaway. And that was important for me too. It wasn't just like I was going to spend my time, because again, to Halle's point, we don't have endless time, especially if you're trying to turn the dissertation into the monograph, right? So you have to be balancing multiple writing projects, but because it had a bigger takeaway that was broader than just the arcane footnote problem, I felt it was worth working through and writing as an article. But again, following that sequence of getting the bigger intellectual territory mapped out and staking out that presence, then allowing myself, to kind of indulge my intellectual curiosity and just work through this strange example of epigraphy that was really bothering me.
Rachel, do you also think, you had the longer article that came out in the Art Bulletin, which had to be framed for the general academic artistry reader. And you're in a field, maybe all of our fields are like this, but which has a very distinct other series of big journals. And, like there's a whole series of journals as big as the Art Bulletin that are in classical studies. Do you feel that showing that you could do the big thematic article, and then the very specific in the weeds article was really good, helped you get the job, or helped you,
Yeah, I do. Again, all of this is very personal from my own experience of who I want to become as a scholar. I really think, they're not paying me to say this, that being at CASVA was a big part of that for me, that being in a cohort of art historians who were working all across, time and all across space, that really solidified and affirmed for me that I wanted to speak to a broader audience. At the same time, Christy's right. There are a lot of prestigious journals in the, working on the ancient Mediterranean side of things. And I wanted to talk to them as well. I mean, I actually came to Roman art history through philology. I was a Latin major as an undergrad, and that was kind of my road to Roman art. And so this second article I did publish with the American Journal of Archaeology, which is sort of the big one for the ancient Med people. Right. And so to be able to say, I can talk to both, I don't know, obviously what the search committee's process was. I don't think it hurt. I don't think it hurt to be able to show that I have the range. But again, mentorship is key to figure out what the appropriate venue is, and reading widely is key to figure out what is suitable, what speaks to people, and really honing in on who your potential audience is and how that's important for your own scholarly development.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, because it really does depend on where you are in your career. What is expected at each moment. And I mean, one thing that I might add in is that a lot of universities or departments, it seems to me now, thank goodness, are giving much more weight or positive weight to people who are doing kind of more public humanities, doing things in the community, whether it's publishing, whatever an area of expertise that you have, but kind of contributing to society more broadly. That is seen as a very positive thing. But just to reiterate what Rachel and Halle said, not at the expense of doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing, which is writing the dissertation, getting the if that is what you need to be doing, having that as a sort of top priority. Eugenia. We have a few.
Can somebody speak to the second part of that question about publishing in non-academic venues and whether that is helpful or harmful?
Have you guys done, I mean, I don't know, maybe, Rachel, have you published in non-academic? Not so much? Or?
I would say academic adjacent. I have I've contributed to museum catalogs. And that is, a different beast. It's a different readership. It's obviously a very different length when you're writing an object entry in a museum catalog than an article. But I think really the core of what Halle said stays the same for this question as well, that it's time management, and that if you feel that you have the time to have these other projects in your pipeline while you're still advancing the thing that will really count most towards your promotion and scholarly growth, whether that's the completion of the dissertation, the first major article, the monograph, whatever your respective stages, as long as that's not being given short shrift, this is just my take, I don't see why not. Maybe that's not.
Yeah, I mean, I and I guess I would add in that when I try to support younger colleagues or younger scholars who are just getting going, I really do ask them, like, what do you want? I mean, if you want a tenure track job and you want to get tenure, well, what do you need to do to get that? And make a list of those things and then do them. So, if writing for a non-academic journal is not what your university or school or museum or whatever it is going to want to see from you, of course you can do it, but then don't be worried or don't be surprised if that gets critiqued at your interim review or whatever. I mean, I think it really has to be, I mean, maybe we wish it was different, but it really has to be based on where you are in your career. And, in the same way, I would add into that, I would also add into that, you don't want to be publishing in all the same journals all the time either. Mm-hmm. You don't want, if like you find one journal that loves your work, every journal has its own audience. So you want to try to get things in a variety of different journals. The other thing to add into this, which about the non-academic, is there are, I think, wonderful online academically oriented journals now, which are open access. I mean, I'm thinking of one close to my field, which is Journal 18, which does 18th century studies. There's Platform Space, which does things on architecture, like architecture very broadly conceived, and so on. Medievalists have great ones. I think some of those are great places to publish, to get something that'll come out fast. They're often looking for a lot of content. Sometimes they're peer reviewed, sometimes they're not. But I wouldn't poo-poo on, even speaking as the editor of the Art Bulletin, I wouldn't poo-poo the online places to get something out fast, right? Because it can come out usually pretty quickly. They often want short things, little discoveries. So, I think having some of those other places to get your information out is great as well. So I don't know if but there's so many of them now, and they're really interesting. They're publishing often much more kind of open-ended things. So looking at some of those could be a really great way to plus, right, they get so much more traffic than an academic journal is going to get. I mean, I have to say, when I started sending some of my own stuff out and publishing it online, I was getting so many more emails back from people saying, I loved it. And so, doing one or two of those short things could be really useful as well. Jania, next.
Does anyone have any advice for undergraduates who are interested in publishing? And do journals who cater to undergraduate writing evaluate articles the same way that you might at AB?
I'll start with this one. I think that if you are, I mean, first of all, I would say publishing in many levels, publishing as an author, being involved in publishing as an editor or as an editorial assistant is all great. And I think it's one of the great career paths for people in art history. If, let's say, you're an undergrad or a grad student, doing a undergrad or PhD in art history can be a really great entree into publishing. So I just say, from a career point of view, my sense is it really varies undergraduate journal to journal. I think that, I mean, I'll speak about the one that I know about the best, which is the University of Toronto has an undergraduate journal, which the articles do go out to readers. They're usually readers within our department who were not the professor that the student wrote the article for, so somebody else in the department. I think they're great if you have a great seminar paper that you wrote and you wanted to get it out there. I think doing a short version of it is a great thing to have on your CV, your resume, if you're applying to grad school. That really shows that you're already thinking professionally. And just the process of taking an essay, that maybe you wrote frantically at the end of a semester, or, and then seeing what it's like, because, as they say, all writing is rewriting. What does it feel like to take that and turn it in, polish the words, get the footnotes just right? It's a kind of amazing experience that I think or at least our undergrads don't get enough chance to do, because they're so busy and trying to juggle so much work. So anytime you have that chance to really see, take something which had a little spark of brilliance and then work, dig in hard and fix the sentences and add in a good intro, is just a phenomenal life experience, because it just feels very satisfying, I think. So I think that's great if there are places. I would say that most of the undergraduate journals that I know, U of T and elsewhere, the process is not usually as rigorous as I make the poor authors go through for the Art Bulletin. But but it's still, you're going to get some critique, you're going to get some editorial comments, and that's all great. I think that's a good process to experience, and to have that as part of your dossier, whether you're applying for jobs or grad school or whatever. So I don't know, Halle, or do you guys have any?
Just linking into that last question as well, this idea of publishing and undergraduate, journals, as well as the contemporary art magazine. These, I think it shows as, it opens up career possibilities. Say you don't want, or it's not working out on the job market, which we know is so absolutely brutal right now. Having a range of publications, being able to speak to diverse audiences and show that you've got those skills from undergraduate level all the way up. I think it is only a feather in your cap, when you're getting a variety of jobs.
Rachel, any thoughts? Did you?
Unfortunately, this is something about which I know very little, undergraduate journals. So I would just say, though, that if you're interested and if you're moved, as Christy said, it is a very satisfying experience to see your work published. And so if you're motivated to work through that rewriting and honing in process, you should do it. I can't give advice, unfortunately, any informed advice about potential venues or what that process might look like. I'm sorry about that. It's been a while since I was an undergrad.
I mean, I just think it's, there's something about, so much of what we do, or we ask our students to do as students, is, read all this stuff, come to lectures, and then write an essay, and then it kind of just disappears. And you have comments back, but you never get that sense of, okay, it's not perfect, but I know I can fix it. And that, I mean, I will again speak for myself. I mean, I have to write all the time. I never get over that. Like, I get the first draft done and then I'm like, phew, and then realizing like the work has just started. So kind of reminding yourself that everybody's first drafts are messy and crappy, and you're going to rewrite them, and it's all fixable. So that, just sort of not losing faith in your own ability to do that is a lovely thing to learn early, and will kind of be very useful going forward. Eugenia, we have
another question that speaks a little bit to our next webinar, actually, but let's talk about it now. They ask, given that final Art Bulletin articles are generally 15,000 words, do you suggest submitting an article, a draft, in that range, or should the draft be slightly below to leave space to respond and grow from reviewer feedback? It's a good question.
Rachel,
or Rachel, yeah.
I was going to say, Rachel, when you submitted the first draft of your essay, was it 16,000? Was it around 16?
It was very close to 16,000. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was very much revised. The final version that came out in March responded to a lot of input. As I mentioned in my presentation, some of what I had deemed not worthy of making the cut for the essay, the readers wanted to know. And so and then of course what I had sort of spent more time developing, they said, why is this in here? You can footnote this. Christy had some good comments as editor-in-chief on really how to be honest, lose the sort of grad student tone that I was still finding my way writing out of. And by that, I really mean she helped me craft a voice that was more authorial and confident instead of overly citing other people's work. So this was all very important constructive feedback. But the words, they were already there. So things were just subtracted, things came in. I would say you can't calculate it because you don't know how the readers are going to respond. So you should just take the amount of words that you need to convey your point, right? If you feel like you can make your argument concisely in 12,000 words, don't pad it, right? But if you feel you need to take the 16,000, don't hold back on really developing that point, anticipating that there are going to be readers reports asking for you. You'll find the way, and the editor-in-chief or editors-in-chief will also give guidance.
Halle, what do you thank you, Rachel?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think I'm trying to think. It's a long time ago now for Art Bulletin, but yeah, I think the article ended up being nearly 18,000 words. Maybe that's not even allowed anymore.
Not
But
allowed.
yeah, it was a very long one. And I just was like, yay, they'll take a lot of words. And I did what Rachel said, which is I'm going to take that breath that you can have, because so many articles you're writing 8 to 10, maybe 12 if you're lucky. So your bulletin article, that's just a different beast. And so I think, you just develop the argument to its fullest and to where you're happy. But yeah, like as well, don't think you have to reach exactly to the highest word limit, because that's just like what we tell all of our undergrad students, perhaps, like don't just fill space, which I definitely did as an undergrad. So yeah, I would say there's no need to take into too much account what a reader will want, because it may be that they want you to cut and not add.
You never know.
You cannot.
I sometimes think about the length of Art Bulletin articles as it's like a regular article that you might publish in another journal plus. And so that plus is that bigger context, which you probably would not have quite the space, again, this is big generalizations, that you might not have you can't quite get into big methodological issues or suggestions for the field or whatever in that 8,000 word, because you can just kind of talk about your case study or your object, whatever it is. So, I think that it just gives that kind of like breathing room. I would say most of the articles, and again, I'm not cutting things out, they're shorter, they end up being 12 to 16 by the time people add in the heft. The other, again, heft that I will often ask people to think about for Art Bulletin articles is that Art Bulletin articles are so often used for teaching. They are, assigned. I mean, we know from the metrics, we know they're assigned to students, advanced undergrad students, grad students. And so I will often encourage people to have very hefty footnotes, which is normally something, all that apparatus. But what you're doing is you're helping the person coming behind you find out more about this broader context or whatever it is. So sometimes that I will, if there's space, I will ask people, just give me really beefy footnotes, because it'll just be super helpful for young scholars coming behind you to be able to see where you took material from, what you're reading. The one, actually, we have another. I was going to add in something, but let's go, Eugenia, to the next question.
Before we do, actually, Christy, though, it'd be great. Speaking of length and Art Bulletin, can you speak just for a couple of minutes about what you've been doing in the last couple of issues with a small focus on shorter pieces and the opportunities for things like that?
Yeah, so and this is something that Art Bulletin has certainly done in its over 100-year history, is to have articles which are, let's say, multiple voices, or bringing in, having a theme, a topic, a problem, And then very often, I mean, although not always, I will commission people to write shorter pieces around a particular problem. So the one, there's two that I think Eugenia is referring to. One, which came out in March, which was a series of short pieces on queer space, basically, on the idea of the interior as being a site of queerness, nonconformity. And in that case, it was actually a talk that I heard given at Wellesley College that then I asked 3 people to respond to. And that came out and I've since heard has been, stimulated all sorts of other things that have come out of it. So that's a kind of opportunity. And then there's one coming out in the next issue, which is will be out this summer, on computer vision. And Eugenia, I can't even remember now. I think it's 7 people who wrote quite short pieces, like 1,500 words each, around how computer vision could potentially be changing art history and changing the discipline. There's one also we're working on now on how repatriation is going to affect our discipline and what that could possibly mean as things are being returned to countries and so on. So those kinds of short articles, I'm always interested in hearing from people. If you have ideas for something like that, I'm always interested in hearing ideas. So that's something to contact me about. So that's a different kind of article that we also publish in Art Bulletin. And I think those can, I try to obviously be finding things that are really of the moment, things that people are thinking about or should be thinking about, kind of places where art history intersects perhaps with current events, and so on. So Eugenia, I assume that's what
Yeah, and someone just followed up asking, is this something that's becoming a trend? They're seeing some journals asking for much shorter works, that still need an argument and review and case study in only 7,000 words. Is this something that you're all seeing?
I'm definitely seeing it. And, that there is a kind of Art Bulletin article, right? I mean, we all know it's the big hefty article with 120 footnotes and 20 beautiful images, because that's the other lovely thing about Art Bulletin is the 20 all color images, which many journals are not able to do. That is not, we are interested in other interventions into the journal. I would say trying to do an art bulletin essay in 5 to 7 words, I just don't see it. It would have to be something different. And, again, I'm certainly open to hearing from if you have ideas of something. But I think, one of the great things is that the Art Bulletin still does publish 16,000 word essays. And I would hate to lose that because it is a venue where you can do that big, hefty thing that's not a monograph or that's not a book. Even collected essays are not often going to give you that much real estate. So I think it is great that the Art Bulletin still does that, especially when there are other places that can publish the shorter thing. But that doesn't mean that we wouldn't. It just means that it's tended to be, I try to keep in the same way that I will not give over more than one article to one of these collective articles, because I don't want to have, I get about 180 articles a year for Art Bulletin, and we publish 20 basically. So, I have to say no to so many people I don't want to say no to. So I don't want to have to say no even more than what I'm doing. So I do try to keep that space for people who are submitting the very, the big hefty articles.
Thank you, Christy. We have a really good question about the craft of writing. And Rachel and Christy, you both talked a little bit about your writing groups. Someone writes, I often feel that art history writing can focus narrowly on academic arguments to the detriment of one's writing practice. Do you have advice for maintaining writing as a creative practice or craft?
Oh, so important. Rachel, do you, I mean, this is, I am so fascinated by this question and challenge as academics. That
It's
we
a
are
definite challenge, to be sure. I have a couple of different directions that I'm going to answer this in. I think there is room to be creative and to show what your particular writing style, approach to writing is, even in something like the Art Bulletin. And for me, that begins with the objects themselves. I opened my dissertation, I opened the Art Bulletin article, both with really close looking at one object, because this is just true to me. I came to art history as an objects person. Because I just fell in love with the act of handling and engaging with something so closely. And so for me personally, being able to spend the time and space to give it over to the visual analysis actually is a really creative moment for me, in writing, in which I can, get a little bit more personal and descriptive than perhaps the tone I take when I am honing in on the argument. So that's sort of one thing I wanted to say. And the other thing, this is going to sound completely wild, but there is this writing entity out there. It's really for creative, like fiction writers. It's called National Novel Month Writing NaNoWriMo. Anyway, you're supposed to write a novel in the month of November. It's crazy, but they have this wonderful platform where you can log your word counts for a writing goal. And I've actually used this to be in, to sort of immerse myself in this larger writing community that, again, is mostly fiction writers. To sort of keep those creative juices flowing. And I find that their metric system, again, this is just me personally, I know this sounds a little weird for academic writing, but I really enjoy challenging myself to hit what I'm obviously not trying to write a novel in a month, but I scale it back for what's appropriate for my writing project. And it makes it more fun. It breaks up, I think what we think of as academic writing. And so that's just something I'm going to throw out there.
Halle, how do you deal?
Yeah, I think I love that idea. I think I would love to let myself go a bit free like that. Maybe one day. I think that would be fantastic. This comment mentioned that a lot of writing at academia, it's overly maybe laborious, difficult to get through. You're like, what's the point necessarily? So I think the most impactful academic writing tends to be the ones that open up, or at least for me, they're the ones that open up stories of makers, of objects, of artists, of worshipers, of whatever it is. But it's the one that takes the research, that really, really intense level of research where you're going through, in my case, 12th century diaries and trying to find out what's this say, what's the import here, and using it to tell stories that otherwise we couldn't, right? And so I think for me, it would be being creative in trying to fill in gaps as well, like saying, well, we don't know this for sure, but here's the evidence, and I'm going to tell a story here of lives that can't clearly be reconstructed. So that's my creative process, and foregrounding whatever particular story or narrative, keeping narratives going and having the research be there, have the heft there, but always pulling it up, to the surface to tell us why it matters, and keeping some things that should be in the footnotes, like it's hard. You may really love that little bit of information, but it just takes away from the flow.
Yeah, I think those are really great ideas. I mean, one suggestion that I have, and we put it in the link into the chat. And there are a lot of these. This just happens to be the one that I go to every day, which is there are a lot of online writing communities. One of the one that I use is London Writers Salon, which is free to use, and 4 times a day at 8 a.m. London time, New York time, LA time, and Sydney time, you log on, and for 50 minutes, it's through Zoom, you log on, everybody sits silently in their little boxes and writes. And it's a much larger community as well, in the sense that they have workshops. There's a very active academic writers subgroup that meets, super supportive people, doing all kinds of different academic writing. It keeps me honest. Even when I'm super busy and teaching, I try to hit 1 hour a day, just 1 hour a day, to get some of my own stuff done. And, again, even though we're all in our little cubicles on Zoom, it's just kind of nice to know, okay, just write for 50 minutes, get something done for 50 minutes. So having those groups, but why I really love it is because it's not all academic writers. I mean, it's mostly not. It's memoirists and novelists and poets and writing is a main thing of what we do as academics. That is, like, we might not define ourselves as writers, but we have to write. We have to communicate what it is that we're so excited about to other people. And, taking a writing class, creative nonfiction, taking a poetry class. I mean, I do that just because it's pleasurable, but I really feel like it loosens up my very overly tight academic writing style. This is a lifelong thing of whatever you want to call it, finding your voice or whatever. One of the things if there are 3 things that I look for in every Art Bulletin article. One is original research, contribution to the field, and clear writing. And if the writing is so jargony, is so, it won't get sent out to readers. So working on your writing is not a waste of time. It is, because it's about communication. It's about speaking clearly and, avoiding the trendy term of the moment. You don't need that to talk about something exciting and new and different. So I think thinking about your writing, there's a million, even journaling, all that kind of stuff helps. Just allowing the words to come out more easily, more fluidly, I think is great. I mean, one thing that I often do when I'm trying to help authors revise their essay, I really love using first person. I really love it when people say, I discovered this topic, blah, blah, whatever it is. So even things that you were told never, never, never do, maybe that was true for the dissertation, but it might not be true for the article. So finding that middle ground, finding a way that it feels as natural as it can. Obviously this is a lifelong challenge, but working on your writing is really, really important. And you really want to be thinking about the sort of choice of language. Again, all this can be fixed, but it's something that I think should be part of our professional development throughout our careers, because we have to write all the time. Book reviews, letters of recommendation, articles, books, and so on. So I think the writing is super important. So the London Writers Salon, you'll see me there every day. I'm there. But there's a ton of other ones too that are available. I mean, I like London Writers Salon, and I often send students there because it just gives you a structure in your day, and it's free. To go to it. They do have sort of add-on things, but just to show up at the hourly writing times is, I just think, a great accountability tool that I use to keep myself from avoiding writing, which all of us would do if we could. Any advice on sorry, Eugenia, I was reading. Do you want to?
Okay, it's a good fitting question for you. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Our viewer wants to know if we have any advice on what to do if an article is rejected by AB, and what are some of the common reasons that articles are rejected?
Okay. So the odds, and I have to put it this way, but just so you know, I mean, people are like, oh my God, my article was rejected from Art Bulletin. Most of the articles I get, I reject because I can only take 20 a year. And so, that's just, it doesn't mean the article is bad. I'll give you some of the reasons, but it's not, I will never have a career. It means nothing. It means that article did not work for the Art Bulletin now. That's what that means. And there are particular reasons why it wouldn't work. So it's, and I don't know whether this is of comfort or not of comfort, but when I have people who get very upset that their articles get rejected, it's always senior people, senior people who think, how can my article be rejected? So it happens to everybody, and the longer you're in academia, the list of things that will get rejected, you just it just rolls off your back, So why do things get rejected? Aside from the obvious, sometimes people send me articles that are, let's say, very quantitative. They're just not a good fit for the Art Bulletin. They're quantitative, they're super technical with no kind of overview of why that's interesting. Other reasons, articles are very, very narrow. A new discovery about a Titian painting that was hidden from view for, it could be fascinating and important, but it doesn't have the breadth. And I don't see evidence in the article that the breadth could be developed. I don't see enough. Those will tend to get rejected. Articles that the language, the writing is just, the writing needs so much work that I know it's beyond what I can do or what the copy editors can do. So sometimes it just needs a really good edit. It's too wordy, it's filled with jargon. Again, it's not fatal, but it's more than I can fix in my role as editor. Articles that propose a big idea, but the big idea is really not new enough. This is why Italian Renaissance painting is so important, because it shows the humanity of the world. I'm being facetious, but if it doesn't have a big enough spread to what it's saying, and if it's not new enough. One thing that has come up, and actually the editorial in the next Art Bulletin will talk about this a little bit. As you can imagine, ideas run in waves. So there will be times, like for instance, right now, what am I receiving a ton of? Articles on looking at environmental history, using environmental history as a lens. Articles which are have a goal or an aspiration, decolonization, about history of colonial XYZ. Articles about race, minority artists, less represented artists. Articles about gender identity, and so on. Many of them are great, but I can't just publish that. I want to show the range of things that people are working on in the field. So sometimes, say, people will write back if I reject an essay on an African-American artist working in the 1940s. And they say, but nobody's ever looked at this person before, or whatever, something like that. And I will say, but that's not enough that you've discovered something new and told me about an artist I didn't know about or a curator I didn't know about, that's not enough to get it in the Art Bulletin. You have to tell me what's the bigger takeaway. And that's true for many of the topics, is that it can't just be a new addition to the range of our knowledge. It's got to have a kind of new approach to it, or a new kind of take on it. There was something else I was going to say. People say, I have these two things that I'm thinking. This one, it seems very contemporary. Everybody's talking about this, and this is another one, but it's a little kind of off the beaten track. I'll always say to people, send me the one that's off the beaten track. I want to see new, different things. I want to see people who are really asking questions that I haven't seen in the hundreds of essays that I've read. I am looking for that kind of super innovative approach or material or take on something. So those, it will have a range of reasons why something might not, and there are other reasons as well, but those tend to be the big ones. It's often just not, it doesn't mean the article, the research is bad. It's not a good fit for what is Art Bulletin's brief in terms of reaching this very broad community. I would say those are, and I would say, advice on what to do if your article is rejected by the Art Bulletin. I will repeat to you what my advisor told me. And again, this was in the dark ages, pre-digital, when you literally had to send things in a manila envelope. She told me that when I was sending in my first article, she said, go to the store and buy 10 manila envelopes. When the first one gets rejected, put the article in the second manila envelope and send it off. Like, in other words, it doesn't mean the article is bad. You may just be at the wrong journal. The editor may have been, had a bad day. I mean, it could be any number of things. It doesn't mean like abandon ship and don't publish this thing. Stick it in another, metaphorically in another manila envelope and send it off again to somewhere else. And, it goes to other ways. I've published things that then the author told me, was rejected by 5 people beforehand. They didn't see the value in it that I did. So it's not like going down the food chain. It could simply be just wrong day, wrong time, wrong person, send it off to somebody else. See if you can get a friend to read it, and so on. But, it doesn't mean anything. Just get another manila envelope and send the damn thing off again. Is what I would do.
I think whenever you get a rejection and that happens, the most common answer that you can no. It's no to like loads of different things. And so it is nevertheless gutting each time you get that initial no back from something that you really worked so hard on. And but like Christy said, there's a variety of reasons. And I think having mechanisms for when that grant or that job or that article or that whatever it is comes back as no, having ways that you vent in a healthy way too. I know one colleague writes, just vents on paper, right? And then tears it up and it like helps. It's all like people invent loads of ways of like getting it out, because it's okay to feel really devastated. But given that this is what we hear all the time, we have to have coping mechanisms. So feel devastated, I would say the most healthy reaction, feel devastated. And then, don't give up. And don't do the self-flagellation as much as possible. I mean, that's just what I do all the time, which is, what a worthless, because you can do that and then pass on through and into, right, what's next? I'm going to take this grant and I'm going to put it there. I'm going to take this article, I'm going to put it there, and using whatever. So oftentimes with these rejections, you get some feedback and you can say, actually, that's really off base. Or if with a bit of distance, you say, oh, actually, yes, that I could change that and it would be made better, and I'll have a better shot of getting it in. So I just want to chime in and say we all totally feel that pain. And it's about, turning it around again and not giving up.
Yeah, and it never, it never goes away. It's never, nobody likes hearing, one way to think about it is you already have the no answer. The no is a given. So send it, it's like no, everyone's going to get no, but if you don't send it off to another journal, if you don't throw that grant application in the hat, or if you don't apply for that job, you'll never know. A dear friend who is very gainfully employed right now told me it was his 100th job application that got him the job where he's now full professor. So, it is just the nature of the beast that we will be rejected. But it just doesn't mean, I don't want to say it doesn't mean anything. It means, you have to like shift gears a little bit. And it still happens, much as some senior faculty who get rejected from the Art Bulletin would care to disagree. It happens to everybody, and not a big deal.
The only thing I would add is that I think what we're doing right here, right now, is really an important part of the process that, frankly, I'd like to see more of. And I thank Christy for organizing these webinars, because I think both the components of demystifying, but also humanizing and talking about the process really is validating, and it makes you feel less isolated and helps you contextualize the rejections. Having also had many rejections for many things that I organized on a spreadsheet, and then one day when I got the one yes, all you need is one yes for some things, then I put the spreadsheet in a shredder, and it's the version of Halle's colleague ripping things up. It felt very satisfying, but that we don't just internalize and hide and feel ashamed about the rejections. So I think talking about it, humanizing the process, and again, thanking CAA and Christy and other senior people in the organizations and the field for putting these issues on the table with some transparency. This is all healthy.
I was amazed when I became editor of Art Bulletin, how people came up to me and said, friends of mine, my level, age, whatever, said, "Oh, Art Bulletin terrifies me." I'm like, "Terrifies you what?" Like, people get nervous about things and gets nervous about at sending things in. You just have to do it. Do it. I mean, obviously you want to send in the best that you can send in, but just knowing that, I wish I could name names, but I won't. But if you look through issues of the Art Bulletin and you see somebody famous in there, their article got sent back as revised and resubmit. And a lot of them get rejected. So it's not. It's just not uncommon. I mean, those of you, any of you read the New Yorker and love the cartoons in the New Yorker. I went to a talk that Roz Chast, who's so funny, gave about doing cartoons for the New Yorker, saying, her stuff doesn't get in all the time. She sends them tons of stuff which get rejected. And I'm like, Roz Chast can't possibly get rejected. Everybody gets rejected. So it's just the nature of the beast. We have a few minutes left. Is there any other questions? Anything? Any other things that? One thing I did want to ask people, and we're going to give you some information of where you can send this or put it into the chat. We are hoping to do at least a couple workshops every summer. I think is probably a good time for people when they're not during the academic year. What are things that people would find useful around publishing? I mean, it could be about journals. It could be, Thank you for putting the tagline up. If there are, it would be just, we tried to think of things that would be helpful with this and then the readers' reports, but we're very happy to organize other roundtables, workshops that are free to members of CAA that you can just tune into. So, please do send a note to CAA with also any other feedback about the workshop. But it would be very helpful to know what would be useful for people, because then I can ask the right people for next year, and we can do that. Beginning info on making a book proposal. Okay, excellent. That would be a great one to do. So anyways, you don't have to put them in now, but if you think of them, please send them to us. And any final thoughts? Halle and Rachel, thank you guys so much. Thank you both. Any other thoughts about get involved with CAA?
Yeah.
Get on committees?
Yeah. There's so much. I mean, obviously it's free labor, but it is in service of the field, the discipline, the publications, the conferences, bringing together artists and art historians, and I mean, all this, it's important. And I would say, your presence within CAA will only make it better. You'll bring new issues to light. You'll help us change what needs to be changed. You'll help us, put in new programs. And so if you have the time, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're just about 3:55. We're good. Anyways, I would thank Rachel. Thank you, Halle. Thank poor Nachiket. I hope he's safe and fine and dry. I think we covered most of the subjects that I know what Nachiket was going to say. And do please come to the next one, which I think will be fantastic, on readers' reports and how not to let readers' reports get you down, but find them as a really positive way to make your work better and improve your work. And that will be next Wednesday, same time, same place. So thank you all. And thank you to all the tech people, to Megan, JV, and Eugenia.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Oh, and sorry, one other thing that is going up. There's I have found this book incredibly helpful. Wendy Belker, Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks, which exists in many different editions. So you can often get them for like $1 at used bookstores. They're all great. But that I found that, kind of takes you through a 12-week process of doing an article. I still use it all the time when I'm starting something new. So I would just put that out as sort of extra homework reading for you.
I've also used this, not for this particular essay, but I do also find it helpful.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, kind of good writing guidance, and especially about this really tricky thing about, what is my argument? What am I asserting? Like, she has some real series of questions to ask yourself. Like, are you really making an argument, or are you just saying a generality? So it can be very helpful. Okay. I will say, everybody have a lovely afternoon, evening, morning, depending on where you are. And we'll hope to see you next week. Thank you.